If you've read the title of today's video, it is indeed true. We're gonna talk about why people are pretty bad at Vampire Survivors and any games like it. We're going to talk about a few topics. We're going to talk about what is a Vampire Survivor and its offspring, and misconceptions and why the average person sucks at these games. And we're gonna then close it off with some thoughts. First, before we get anywhere, once again, who am I and what are my motivations to speak on this? I'm a nerd that played thousands of games of all genres. I leave a list of the games I remembered playing down in the description if you're curious about what I've played and my takes on it. It's filled with personal opinions, so let's be adults and let's not get too frustrated if we have disagreements over what might be your favorite game. Secondly, there are some relevant games I have played. I've played Vampire Survivors in its entirety, 100% the thing. Played League of Legends Swarm Mode, also 100%. I played a bunch of Holocure and Megabonk as well. I've played a lot of similar games too. I've played The Binding of Isaac, I've played Risk of Rain 2. In general, I've played a lot of roguelikes. I've posted a few more videos about some analysis on games. If you want to get a feel about my opinions on games in general, you could watch them. You don't have to. But at least I hope this warrants me some validity to my points. Anyway, let's continue. What is a Vampire Survivor? Let's just start with the game itself. Vampire Survivors is a game from 2022. It is heavily inspired by the Castlevania franchise, mostly visual, not gameplay-wise. In this game, the player plays a legally distinct Castlevania character against endless waves of enemies, while the player levels and gets upgrades in the hopes of surviving against the onslaught. The player either makes it to the end of the game timer at 30 minutes, or gets overwhelmed by the endless waves of enemies. It was an incredibly big hit, the game itself. It has spawned many games just like it, like any successful game. Only a few of them have gone big, most of them are left in the dust. We often refer to these games as action roguelites and bullet hells, but these names are too broad. We tend to give them the Souls-like treatment and call them Vampire Survivor-likes or clones. Apart from that, these games are also very often described as heavily addicting and dopamine simulators. We'll get to that. Because first of all, we're going to dissect the big three system that makes one of these games. I'm going to assume that if you're on this video, you have at least some knowledge about one of these games. There's a high likelihood if you have played Vampire Survivors, it's the most popular one of them. Anyway, I will be going over the big systems that all of these games share. There's three main components. These are the difficulty progression, the meta player progression, and the in-game player progression. I'll go over all three of those. Let's start with the first system that every single one of these games shares. It's the enemy/difficulty progression. Enemies in most of these games simply get stronger over time. If it's the first minute in the game, all enemies have 100 health and 1 attack, for example. If it's the 5th minute, they have 300 health, 3 attack. Minute 10, 1000 health, 10 attack. Stats in general increase exponentially, quicker increases the later it is in a run. Now in reality, most of the time this is not a smooth upwards line. Instead there's difficulty spikes and small moments of breathing room. And the human brain loves a bit of variation, so that's why we tend to do difficulty curves in games. A little bit bumpy. And while these bumps do exist, the difficulty increase, if you take it on an average, does remain technically the same, just a nice exponential line. And if one of these have multiple stages or multiple levels, most of the time they just start the enemy on either already higher difficulty or they increase on how quickly their stats grow. Or make the enemy slightly more technically difficult to deal with, often give them like bullets that they shoot to the player, whatever. It's generally based on the player's progression and its meta progression, which we'll get to. Then there's also the in-game progression, based on how the player levels in the game itself as they're playing. The player's growth is logistical. It's a mirror to the game's difficulty being exponential. Because levels in these games are often designed with their endgame in mind, you take the player at full upgrades, or whatever their upgrades are expected for the designed stage. You figure out where their build starts stagnating at this point, and have the enemy's difficulty intersect that moment at the timing you want. And at an intersection of difficulty and player progression, the run tends to end with the player dying, because the player can no longer keep up with the difficulty. Very simple. That's also quite literally all there is to player progression within a run. Get XP, don't die, get more XP. Slap a logistical curve on it, you're set. because this game has a meta progression and an in-game progression, meta being the progression that is outside of the part when you're actually playing the game and you're in menus and you're purchasing upgrades. That's the meta layer of it. These games are designed from their endgame perspective, then weaken the player and give the stats back slowly in the form as upgrades. And however, if it's presented as upgrades to us and something that makes you stronger, this leaves a way more positive feeling in our brain. Though technically, it's the exact same. The first half of any of these games is always about grinding and getting these meta upgrades. Back on a game like this having stages, this means that later levels often scale quicker than the player can keep up with based on their current unlocks. It forces them to have a few failures and grind a few new permanent upgrades for themselves, at which point they'll catch up with the curve again and succeed the level. Good feelings. This cycle will continue until the player has unlocked all upgrades, which, if the game is designed well, matches the amount of levels in the game. There's a fourth component that a lot of these games do use, some of them don't. Most notably that comes to mind is League of Legends Swarm. In the beginning half, before the player has all of its upgrades, the player will finish levels, they get the upgrades as they go, all good. This is the main driving force, but this shifts once it's all unlocked. At this point the question becomes, how long could you go without dying? Most of these games will have a moment where the player enters the endless mode of a game, which is often after either sitting out a full run timer or defeating a boss or whatever the goal might be. The reality is, in most cases, a player build cannot grow quicker than the enemy's gross stats due to its logistical nature of player progression, which means the player will eventually die. There's often a designed soft end of the game, which is where most people's run will end on average. There's also a hard cap where enemy stats start increasing at such a rapid pace that unless the player has a cheesy strat that still scales faster or if the game is just designed poorly, will end the run. Cure, for example, has the soft cutoff point at around 30 minutes where a special enemy is almost guaranteed to insta-kill the player. But if you really put your mind to it and have a good build, some players can still get to 45 minutes on the leaderboards, though 50 minutes does seem to be the hard cutoff for that game. And besides, it better ends at some point, because sure, a 6-hour run could be thrilling once, but I doubt will be interesting to play at that point. When people complain that an endless mode isn't endless, generally what they mean is that they felt the endless mode to be too short for their liking. All the bigger Vampire Survivor clones and its offspring follow these systems, sometimes with some small variations. Endless mode being the most optional one, but I do see most of these games use it regardless. These are not guaranteed to make your game tick. You see, a lot of Vampire Survivor clones are there, and the majority of them do not become successes like this game did, except they do follow the recipe of these systems perfectly. You do need a little bit extra to make this game tick, the secret sauce if you will. There is a fifth component, which people will often attribute to game feel. This is a vague concept, because shockingly the games industry in general is not known for its academic and scientific feats. The video game industry is still very much built on like a rock and roll attitude of we'll just wing it and we make millions, hopefully. Which so far, people have been getting away with a lot more than they should have. The guy that did most of the Vampire Survivors design, which is Luca Galante, has a history in gambling games. That shows. From the sound effects of picking stuff up, the chaos slowly unfolding on the screen, and the increasing ridiculous cutscene that plays on the chest that you open. Vampire Survivors knows how to keep the brain engaged and enthralled. It is quite literally that dopamine machine. I am very briefly going to rant about something that I kept seeing as I was researching on what I wanted to do with this video. Every single time somebody brings up like, oh, the developer has a history in gambling design, blah, 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 we move to this online take of, oh, is the game manipulative for making you like it? Listen. We all have this lovely little flesh suit that we cruise on in through life. Your brain and body will just feel things. If your brain makes happy chemistry because lights flashing in a particular way makes you feel good, that's fine. We're silly little creatures. Your body is not the one that would deceive you. What makes the difference between a game being just fun and manipulative? Technically nothing on the game's end. The brain doesn't care about it either. The real question is really who is profiting off of it. Let's say you own a physical slot machine. You put it in your basement, you can have the time of your life, you play like 2 hours a day, good stuff, you have a wonderful time. Nobody's really affected by it. But the second you put that exact same slot machine in a casino, suddenly we have a different problem on our hands. Suddenly there's a group of people that could be profiting off of your possible addiction to this game. That's where manipulation starts happening. At the moment that it's profitable for somebody else. Games themselves are not the manipulator. It's the people putting them in places where they can increasingly profit and especially use this to abuse their player base. That's all I had on that. I'll rant over. I wasn't fully done with my point on the audio-visual stimuli though. For this type of game, it is almost required that this stuff ticks. Else you'll have a pretty hard time hiding the fact that under the hood, the game deliberately starts the player at a mega disadvantage and requests you farm for the first 10 to 15 hours of the game before you arrive at the real game. And it better make that grind engaging, else there is no real reason to stick around for the late game, where you'll be skipping a lot of the cool animations anyways to make way for your now new need of bigger score, faster clears. These systems, combined with addicting audio and visuals, is what really makes these games tick. All the 4 big ones that I've played have dedicated extra time to their visual and audio stimuli. Because of this, they're also bigger successes than the rest of Vampire Survivors' successor clones. The thing these clones also do is something that sets them apart from the main Vampire Survivors. Because why would you play a one-on-one copy of Vampire Survivors if Vampire Survivors is already in my library anyway? League of Legends Swarm game mode was time limited. It uses a bit of that FOMO. It uses its exclusivity, but also in general its integration with League of Legends characters is what attracted people into that game. Holocure is aimed mostly at fans of Hololive. It also brings a few quality of life changes from the Vampire Survivors way of doing things. Plus, Holocure is 100% free, so it pulls in the free-to-play market, which is probably already not at Vampire Survivors, despite it being pretty cheap. Megabonk is the most recent one as of writing this. It puts the 3D spin on it, and it weaves a few systems in from Risk of Rain 2. Quite blatantly, in fact. With all that said, why is the average player pretty bad at these games? I think this has to do with 2 things with the people that pick up these games. One, the game presents itself as if it's going to change your movement skills. They present themselves as a dexterity play. Secondly, the game also presents itself as if it's going to give you a fair chance from the moment that you boot up the game for the first time. We're gonna start with that second point, because we went over it for the most part. Because the game deliberately starts you at a weakened state in which you're required to grind a bunch of runs to unlock stuff and upgrade your character. Players assume that the game gives them a fair chance at the beginning, and they might assume that the game is unfairly difficult and that they lack the skills. The reality is, they lack the understanding of the game and patience. If you understand what the game really wants for you is to grind out upgrades first, it's then a real question of, is the amount of time to invest to get to the good part worth it for you? Do I have the patience for this? Weaker clones will have this grind be either too long or too short, they need a sweet spot for this, or it's not visually engaging enough to make this grind worth it. And then back to the first point, most players will assume the game requires the player's micro movement to be good, that this will somehow be a game of dexterity. In general, there's very little skill expression in these. Megabonk currently probably has the highest skill expression with the 4 I've mentioned, simply because it's in a 3D space. And even in that game, it's mainly just moving around the map. These games are more puzzles than they are a dexterity game. First off, the 2 most important strats in these games are ABL and Snowball Early. ABL stands for Always Be Leveling. Any time wasted is time for the enemy curve to catch up to you. And getting a power spike early, the snowballing part, lets you kill quicker, gain XP quicker, level quicker. It's why I also think that a specific upgrade that almost all of these games have is named counterintuitive. Difficulty is a stat in most of these games that affect the power scale of enemies negatively and spawns more of them. So stronger enemies, more of them. The thing is, because the game starts spawning more enemies, you have more sources of XP spawning in your run, which makes snowballing much more consistent and easy, oftentimes quicker than that negative difficulty modifier on the enemy stats. Difficulty states it makes the game harder, but in reality does the opposite, making the game considerably easier, but generally only once the player has gained full upgrades already and arrived at the end game, else they'll have trouble keeping up. In the end, a vampire survival-like game boils down to figuring out how to get a lead quickly, what items you carry around to victory, which builds can keep you going in a run the longest. The better you are at this, the more trivial movement becomes. So much so that the best runs in these type of games tend to be the ones where the player can leave the computer to go make themselves a little sandwich because the game wins itself, no input required. And that's it, an analysis of a Vampire Survivor game's systems and why they're pretty bad at it because they have these misconceptions to begin with. It'll be interesting to see if we're witnessing the birth of a new genre. It's pretty exciting. I dislike the name, as in we have no name for them. Like, we call them games like Vampire Survivors, Vampire Survivalize. It's so mouthy. Nothing has really properly cemented in that regard, in at least how people talk about them online. They are still being advertised as action roguelikes and bullet hells. I don't think that quite nails down what these games are. They drag in other games that are irrelevant to these. I personally like to coin the phrase that League of Legends gave their game mode as the name of their genre. I think Swarm in itself it's short, it's descriptive, it describes the game's core system. Seems great. I just need the world to adopt it. And now the real question becomes like, is this gonna be it? We have these bigger titles that people play. Will we see new ones? Will we see oversaturation of the market already happening? We don't know. Only time will tell. But I'm here observing it. I can't wait to see what happens. Anyway, thank you for sticking around. Hope to see you in the next one. Later.